and people will just join as they see fit. So welcome, everybody. My name is Rick Gross, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the president of Center City Residents Association. And we're thrilled to have you join us in a very, very important and timely discussion with our city controller about violence. Violence in the city and what we can do to respond, or at least how well the city is doing or isn't doing. Before I start, I want to remind all of you who haven't done so that CCRA's annual meeting is next Thursday night in person at the Friary School. Our keynote speaker is Representative Amen Brown, whose district borders ours, and has been very helpful in working with us on quality of life issues, particularly on ATV issues. And I'm sure he's going to have lots to say that we're going to want to hear. Travis has posted a link for anybody who hasn't registered. We'd like you to register. We're having very nice refreshments, and it should be a very exciting evening, including, we hope, a recorded presentation of some of the Friary students in a selection from Hamilton that they produced, and some other very exciting announcements. So once again, a week from Thursday for the CCRA annual meeting. Please register. In the meantime, this conversation, which I want to thank Maggie Mund and Barbara Halpern for setting up, couldn't be more timely. As those of you who are members, and I assume most of you are, you know that recent incidents have been very disturbing on questions of crime. There was a murder in the 19th Street trolley station at 19th and Market about 10 days ago. There was a rape in Rittenhouse Square over the weekend. While Center City West's crime statistics are not as bad as they are throughout the city, I hear from lots of our members that they have lost a sense of confidence that the city is safe as it needs to be in order for us to be as vibrant as we once were. We're going to hear from our city controller, Rebecca Rhynhart, the first woman ever to be elected city controller in the city of Philadelphia. She uses her audit functions to our great benefit in looking at better management, cost savings, and best practices, and exposing fraud and mismanagement, which I think we all believe has found a home in Philadelphia, unfortunately. She has been working to strengthen internal controls on financial reporting, and she's looked at performance audits on city sexual misconduct policies and the Philadelphia Parking Authority's on-street parking expenses. I know we all share the disappointment that the promised revenue for the city from parking collections has never materialized. But we're here today to hear from her on her very important work in studying the city's approach to gun violence, looking at what works and how they approach it and what might be better. I think we're very, very anxious because we all feel the pain of gun violence, even if it doesn't affect us individually, and not as much in Center City West. We have gotten a reputation as a very dangerous, very gun-oriented city, and we need to move beyond that. So Rebecca, I'm going to turn it over to you. Rebecca's going to talk for about half an hour. If you have questions, would you please put them in the chat room? And when she's done speaking, our managing director, Travis Oliver, will ask the questions and she will answer, and we will stop the Zoom at 2 o'clock. That's all I want to say. Rebecca, you're on. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Richard. It's great to be here. I want to take some time today to talk to you about my office's work on gun violence, our analysis of what the mayor's administration is doing and not doing, and what other cities are doing much more effectively than we are. I do have a presentation. My first deputy, Kellen White, has told me he's on, and if he could get the presentation up, that would be great. Okay, he needs to, can he be given the right to, there we go, perfect. Technical difficulty, we'll wait a minute here.
Sorry, give me 1 second. I had to fix something real quick. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I don't think Rebecca has audited the technical ability of the city, but we can get to that next, right?
Yeah, there are some issues on that front. So
I think that there probably are.
while he's getting that up, I'll just start by saying that as the city controller, the main part of my job is the audit function. So my office is the audit function over all city departments. I am independently elected, and the core part of my job is doing the annual financial audits and performance audits that my office does. In addition to that core responsibility, though, and some of you might be wondering, what does the city controller have to do with looking at gun violence? In addition to the core part of my job, my office under my leadership has leaned into issues and areas that go beyond what the traditional controller's responsibility has been. And the way I look at that is that, of course, I'm doing the core function of my job, and I think my team does it well. But I also want to use my office's analytical ability and research ability to provide recommendations and chart a path forward on all major issues facing the city. And gun violence is one of, if not the biggest issue facing our city right now. So with that, I think Kellen is starting to share. There we go. I just have to get rid of my picture. I can, Kellen, if you're having difficulty, do you want, there we go. Okay, so we're gonna speed past these initial slides. Yeah, and we'll move to the next one. Okay. So my office has done a lot of work around gun violence, and we started doing this back in 2019. So 2018 was my first year in office as the city controller. By 2019, we were seeing increases in the homicide rate here in Philadelphia. And I wanted to do something around the rising gun rates when other cities were seeing declines. And what this shows is that Philadelphia has had the highest per capita homicide rate of any of the top 10 largest cities since 2018. So obviously it's a big issue. We'll go to the next slide. And this is important to take a minute to look at. And I know there's a lot of data on this chart, but what this is showing is the homicide count in our city going back to 1985. Okay. So in 1985, there was about 270 or so homicides. It spiked to 500 in 1990. And then fluctuated back down to about 399, and then back up to about a little over 400 in 2006. With that said, if you look at 2013 and 2014, we were down to numbers in the 260, 270 range of total homicides. And of course, anything more than 0 homicides is a horrible thing. But if you look at the trend, we've had increasing homicide rates for most of the last 5 years. And last year, 2021, the city had 562 homicides, the deadliest year in Philadelphia's history. And this does stand in stark contrast to other major cities like LA, New York, and Chicago that had decreases in their homicide rates before the pandemic. Now, we hear a lot about, well, gun violence has increased everywhere. It did increase in a lot of places after the pandemic, during and after the pandemic. But Philadelphia's homicide rate's been increasing before that. So let's keep moving. So what this shows is that pre-pandemic, what I was just saying, that Philadelphia's homicide rate from 2016 to 2019 went up 29%, while most other major cities were declining. And that picture, the pre-pandemic picture, is what made my team decide to lean into this issue. And in 2019, my office released an analysis on the economic impacts of gun violence, which sounds cold to look at the economic impact, because of course the moral impacts, the human impact is by far the biggest impact. But there is also an economic impact, and past studies have shown that the biggest economic impact is actually on decline or depressed home values around where homicides occur. As part of my office's analysis back in 2019, we did research on what works in other cities. What were some of these other cities doing that we weren't doing? And this was back in 2019. And in 2019, we found 3 programs that, I guess, can we just go back, Helen? I'll just stay there. Yeah. In 2019, and I might be going a little out of order, which is how I typically do this, but yeah, I guess I am going out of order. Okay. You know what? I'll hold my comment. We'll move on in the order of the slides. Let's move on. Helen. So just laying the groundwork for gun violence here in Philadelphia. Normally people are talking about the homicide level. That's what you hear a lot about. But as of September 18th, 1,725 people were shot in our city, which is a tremendous number of people. Shooting victims are predominantly young, Black, and men. We can go on to the next slide. My office and I felt that it's important to look at gun violence in its historical context. And this is something that my office has done research around, that gun violence doesn't just happen to be in the neighborhoods of West and North Philadelphia, these areas that you're seeing on the map. This is a map of Philadelphia. The darker blue areas are the poorest areas of our city, and the red dots are the location of each homicide in the past year. So it is important to look at it in a historical context, that the issue of gun violence primarily affects young Black men in the poorest neighborhoods of our city, which is the result of decades of racist governmental policies, and going back to the 1930s and redlining. And I think it's important to bring this up, just that I think government had a big role in creating this issue. So I think has a big role in fixing it. And it is fixable. I'm going to talk about how we can fix it. This is a continuation of what I was just talking about, that the areas that my office looked at in 2019, we looked at the location of homicides and compared it to the 1937 federal government HOLC grading system for redlining. And that we found that 75% of all homicides in 2019 occurred in areas graded as C or D, declining or hazardous, which was a race-based system. So this is important to note as we analyze it. So what works and what isn't the city of Philadelphia doing right now? What's been found to work, and this is what I called on the mayor to implement back in 2019, and the mayor's administration has not implemented these programs with the urgency, the level of funding, and the intentionality that these programs need. The three programs three strategies when implemented together have led to significant declines in homicides. And I'll explain the programs, but Oakland did these three strategies and saw a 32% decline over 5 years from these programs, and overall a 50% drop in homicide. And New Orleans did the same three programs, and they had a 17% reduction in homicides in the years that they did this. And these programs aren't necessarily new. You can see that New Orleans did this between 2012 and 2014. This is what works. The Harvard researcher Thomas Apt, in his book Bleeding Out, specifically states these are the three programs that work, and you have to implement them together. So that is not actually a debatable subject anymore. That we need to do is implement them. And what they are: group violence intervention, pure violence, and cognitive behavior therapy, talk therapy. What these three programs are treating gun violence like a public health issue, focusing very specifically on those most likely to shoot or be shot in the next year. There's a very small group of individuals in every major city that are most likely to be involved in gun violence. They must be specifically honed in on and offered a way out of that lifestyle through a life coach model. What's been found is the vast majority of these individuals do want a way out and put down their guns to have another avenue for job employment, for another way of life. Those three programs need to be implemented together. It's talk therapy as well. The majority of these young men put their guns down. Now, there's a minority that will not stop shooting, and there must be consequences. This is a carrot and stick approach, and it must have both sides. And so I have called on three things as it relates to the gun violence in our city. One, we must be focusing on these intervention programs, funding them at the levels that other cities fund them at. New York and LA fund intervention work at $24,000 per shooting, while Philadelphia is beginning to fund intervention work, but just at $6,000 per shooting. So we need to fund the intervention programs at the level that is necessary. We need to invest in communities that are most impacted by the violence, and we need to crack down on illegal guns. The prosecution of illegal guns has dropped over the last few years, and the arrests are up for illegal guns by the police department, but the conviction is down by the DA's office, and that is an issue. So let's move on. So my office, in addition to that, has analyzed what the mayor has been spending on the mayor's administration's anti-violence budget. So in the budget that was passed by city council, approved by the mayor, this was last year. So the fiscal 22 budget passed in June of last year, June of 21, for the July fiscal year. And my office did an analysis, this was 1 year ago, which showed that very little bit of the money is actually going to the programs that are likely, the strategies that are likely to have an impact right now or within the next 1 to 3 years. So what we did was we categorized the spending, the $155 million that was touted for anti-violence strategies. We categorized it according to what the leading experts in this field look at spending on these programs. Intervention, which is what I was just talking about, which is 1 to 3 years, you expect a reduction in homicide rate. Thomas Abt, the Harvard researcher, said, if you're doing these programs correctly, within 1 year, you should have a 10% reduction in the homicide rate. That's intervention. Then there's prevention and transformation. Those are longer term programs, 5 to 10 years and longer, that could be helpful, such as like after school programs, other types of economic development programs. They could be helpful generally, but they're not going to stop people from shooting right now. You need that intervention work. So this is what I just went through. This intervention is short term, results in less than 1 year to 3 years. Prevention is medium term, transformation is long term. If we go to the next slide. So what we found was only 21% of this money was going to intervention work. So the majority of the funding was going towards programs, towards investments that might be valuable, but will take years and years to have a measurable reduction in gun violence. So if we're trying to stabilize our city right now and stop this bloodshed, what we need to be doing is focusing on the intervention. It's something that's extremely frustrating from I'm sure to every person listening to this, but just that Kenny's administration has not focused in on what works to get this violence down. So then we did this same analysis in fiscal 23, which again, this budget was just passed. So we did that analysis last year. But what we've seen, and we released that to the mayor and his administration, what we're seeing though is a continuation of the status quo in how the money is being spent and the lack of focus on intervention. So in this budget that was just passed, only 17% of the money is going towards the intervention work. In addition, there's the money that is going to this intervention has had no ongoing evaluation to actually see if the programs are working. So this is all, if you're getting frustrated listening to this, it is frustrating. The reason that I think it's important to analyze this from my role as city controller to make the recommendations is because there are strategies that work to get it down. The city of Philadelphia is just not doing them right now. So my office has also done other projects. I don't want to say projects, but other work around gun violence. We created a map that uploads automatically each night that is on the controller's website called controller.phil. It's at controller.phila.gov. That's phila.gov. That maps shooting victims. It says in real time. It updates once a day. So I think that's as real time as we can get. But it's the reason that we did this was to keep the urgency around this topic, around this subject, that each of these dots represents a shooting victim this year. Each of the yellow dots is someone that's been shot, and each of the red dots is someone that's been killed. And you can see the area that has sort of the fewest number of yellow dots in the middle, which is Center City. So, and this is a lot more. So centers, I mean, and this is an issue that's impacting the whole city, and I definitely know that Center City is feeling the impact of this. And just so that you know about me, I live in Center City, and my daughter, my husband and I and our daughter, we live south of Rittenhouse Square, and our daughter goes to Greenfield Elementary School. So I am definitely part of the community here. So gun violence clearance rates. This is also work my office has done. We looked, the other piece of this is law enforcement, is police and district attorney. So I've talked about the intervention programs that the strategy that works to get at the people most likely to shoot or be shot. It's looking at it like a public health issue, very focused. And I've spoken about that intervention work and what needs to be done there. Spoken about it does need to be investment into communities most impacted by the violence. Often we find that, rec centers, libraries, things are closed in the communities that are the poorest. The city needs to change that. The other piece of the violence is, what is law enforcement doing? And how is our criminal justice system working or not working? So my office looked at gun violence clearance rates, which are clearance rate is basically an arrest rate. It is the rate that police clear a case. So if we're looking at gun homicide, and this is data from 2019, it hasn't gotten that, it's gotten a little bit better since then. It's up to about 41% or so, but it's not good. It's the majority of homicides in Philadelphia go unsolved, which is a complicated issue. My office is right now auditing the police department to figure out, how do we chart a path forward for policing in our city. And the clearance rate is complicated by a number of factors, but the bottom line is, when as a city, by not clearing and making arrests for more homicides, there is a feeling of fear perpetuating the city and our neighborhoods, which is not good. And then clearance rate, you can see for non-fatal shootings is only at, it was 23% in 2019. It has, I believe, gone up a little bit, but there's still way too low. So that's an issue with the police department, and it's complicated though. And that's why my office is auditing the police department to see what support police need and what possible changes are necessary to better provide public safety. So, and the other piece was, I did mention the conviction rate on illegal firearm. The police have been arresting more and more individuals for having illegal firearms, but the conviction rate by the district attorney has declined over the last few years. So that is another piece of it not working the way it should. I know that was a lot, and it might have been a little bit academic, but I do think that it's important to frame the issue of it is solvable. We can get a sense of safety back in our city, and definitely we need to. It is doable. Other cities have done it. We can do it too. We're just not, the city of Philadelphia is just not doing what works right now, and we need leadership to do it. So with that, I would love to open it up to questions. And I really do feel we can bring it back. We can bring our city back. So want to end on a positive note here.
So Travis, anybody who has questions, I see a bunch have come into chat. Please put them in chat, and Travis will handle the questions with Rebecca. I think there's 4 or 5 there, and there's room for several more. Go ahead, Travis.
Okay, first question. If there aren't jobs for these people, will the programs be successful?
Great question. So the best intervention programs actually are coupled with a job opportunity. So the programs are basically when the individuals are focused upon, the individuals most likely to shoot or be shot, they are offered a way out of that lifestyle. And that includes job training, that includes a life coach from someone who has the same lived experience. That includes money if they need money in the short term for their kid's diaper or anything like that. Like, so absolutely. Now, long term, the key to ending gun violence long term would be lifting people and communities out of poverty and creating job opportunity. So that absolutely needs to be done at the same time from a longer term perspective, which is creating pipelines for jobs and creating job opportunity and improving the school system, because the school system, our city's education system, is a big part of the problem that we need to fix it so that all of our schools are good. So yes, it is multifaceted in terms of an issue, but the way that I think we need to look at it is we need to stop the bleeding right now. We need to stop this, everybody, all of the gun shots going off every night in the city, and then we can work long-term towards fixing the root causes.
Okay. All right. Next question. What is the current mindset among administration officials responsible for implementing anti-violent programs? And why are they not following the proven models in other cities? Is there no reward for new thinking, or is there ideology difference of opinion?
That's a great question. And it's something that I've thought about a lot, because it's maddening to call for things that work in other places year after year and have people continue to die while the proven models aren't implemented with enough rigor to do it. And I don't exactly know how to answer that other than to say that they haven't done them. I think the mayor's administration has been slow to implement them. In 2019, when my office was calling on it, they put $500,000 for a pilot for one of those programs right before the pandemic hit. And then there's another program called Chicago Ready, which is also intervention work, which they've had in this pilot phase for several years. And there's no evaluation that I know about coming out of that. So it just seems like things are sort of stuck in pilot phases and there's not accountability around it. Honestly, I think it's about leadership and about commitment to getting things done and to doing what works and implementing it. And it's just not there right now.
And Rebecca, I'll add that part of the issue is the administration isn't necessarily transparent about efforts they have made and what hasn't worked. So we know after meeting with someone like David Muhammad, who implemented Oakland's strategies, it failed 3 or 4 times before it worked. But Oakland was transparent that they tried and it failed. So what we don't know, and we've asked, is if they've tried anything, and we haven't gotten an answer either way. And so it just leaves everyone wondering, both our office and the public, what are the efforts being made, but they're not being transparent about what efforts they've started.
Thanks, Kellen. I appreciate that.
Okay, and next question. I think you just answered it, but I'll read it to you. I'm perpetually disappointed with the lack of accountability of the existing funded program leaders to prove their effectiveness. How can this be changed?
I agree. I think that we have to continue to push for more urgency, transparency, accountability. I think my office put a request into the mayor's office of violence prevention back in May, asking for certain information. And we never got a response back in terms of accountability and program rigor. So how does it change? I think that there needs to be continuous pressure on the mayor and his administration, but in the end, there might need to be, different leadership to make that happen.
Okay. Why has City Council not moved in a more concerted fashion to address gun violence, especially as administration clearly cannot effectively address this issue?
So I think on City Council is the legislative body, so there's a limit on what they can do. They can just legislate. So urban violence is for the most part committed with illegal guns. Gun laws are controlled at the state level. So I think City Council has done a good amount, to be fair to City Council, that Council Member Gautier, Council Member Kenyatta Johnson really pushed hard, and others pushed hard in 2022 to have much more money put in for anti-violence. So I think they have done something, and I've done a lot of work with Council Member Gautier in West Philadelphia around trying to put pressure on the mayor to do more, as her district has really been just devastated by gun violence. So I think that they have done. Some of the members of council have done a lot.
Okay. Have you really looked into the possible root causes?
So the root causes of gun violence have to do with, are very correlated with disadvantage. So very correlated to poverty and lack of opportunity. And that's why it's so important to look at gun violence in its historical context, because it gives a lot of understanding to what's going on, that it's gun violence comes from a situation where there isn't opportunity for traditional, what we might think of as careers, that there's not opportunity in many of these zip codes. And the majority of gun violence is concentrated in 14 of the 40 zip codes in our city. So I think that improving the education system and job opportunity is a huge part long-term, but short-term, we need to do the intervention work to stop the bloodshed.
Okay. All right. What happened to the CompStat system used by police commissioners, such as Bill Bratton in Philly by John Timoney?
So CompStat is a policing system to deploy related to crime patterns. And my office right now is auditing Philadelphia's police department, and we are looking into deployment and how our police department is deploying officers. But there's been a good amount of coverage of this as well in the newspaper, that the police department is short-staffed right now, and coupled together with the police department being short-staffed, that there's a high number of officers injured on duty, which means that there's fewer officers on patrol. So the police department is struggling with reduced staffing right now, but I'll have more information on deployment and deployment strategy when this my audit comes out, which will be in the next few weeks.
When we meet with State Rep Brown, what should we ask of Harrisburg to help with this problem?
So that's a great question. And stronger gun laws would be great for the state and the country. with a Republican-controlled legislature, that will be very difficult. I think that, that the Philadelphia delegation to the state legislature has been helpful to the city. But a lot of what needs to happen around controlling the violence needs to be done at the city level, from there's the mayor, the police commissioner, the district attorney, and the courts. And those are the main players that in the criminal justice and public safety system here in Philadelphia.
All right. What is the best way to demand more transparency, given that you said there needs to be more to move administration?
Well, this is something that transparency is so important, and I believe really strongly that an open government is the best form of government. That the reason that people don't trust government a lot of the times is because government doesn't share information. And so I've continued to push the county administration to be transparent. We've started to release data on the controller's office, on my website, the controller's office website, because I think it's that important, which is one of the reasons that we've done the gun violence real-time mapping. And we've done a lot around transparency on how the city spends money. So my office will continue to do this. I think that the more the public puts pressure on the administration, the better on this.
Has there been money budgeted through the city council or national grants?
Yeah, there has been money budgeted from city council. That's the $200 million in anti-violence money that I had mentioned, that only about 17% of it was going to intervention work. And even with that funding, there's not transparency and accountability around if that's working or not. So what really should be happening is there's money put out for anti-violence strategy, and then each year it needs to be analyzed and evaluated to see if the strategy is working. And according to experts in the field, if you don't have a homicide rate that goes down in a certain area, if your strategy is focusing on those most likely to shoot or be shot in a certain area of West Philadelphia, say, in 1 year, if that hasn't reduced the homicide rate in that area, then that's not a success. That's according to experts in this field. We're not getting that. So there's not the program evaluation or the rigor that we should see, unfortunately.
All right. Are there more examples of how we can provide positive alternative choices?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good programs, good strategies out there that have been extremely successful and focused on pulling people out of the life of violence. And what it gives me so much hope on this is that these programs are so successful. They are successful when they're coupled with job training, when they're coupled with therapy, which changes mindset, and coupled with assistance to bridge the gap of changing that lifestyle. So there are positive cases of this working very well. Chicago's Becoming a Man program. LA has a very good program. Chicago has the Ready program. Most other cities have a program, an intervention program that is working quite well.
All right. What do you think about bringing back stop and frisk?
I don't think we should bring back stop and frisk, and I'm going to explain why. Stop and frisk is the policy which is unconstitutional What's legal is called a Terry stop. And that is the practice of, if you see someone that a police officer thinks has just committed a crime or is about to commit a crime, they can be stopped. And that continues now. But the old policy of stop and frisk resulted in very, very few weapons being found for the number of stops, and was traumatizing to communities of color. So no, I don't think we should bring back stop and frisk, but I do think that we need some course correction around how we're handling law enforcement and around getting some sense of consequence or order on our streets. So I think that the police need to feel supported and empowered to do their job while also making reforms in policing at the same time. I think we can get this under control. I don't think we need to go backwards. I think there's a way to go forwards, that we can have public safety for everyone at the same time that there are some consequences. Because right now there are not consequences to disorderly conduct, to retail theft. And I think that those things need some course correction.
Has your office tried mounting a PR campaign for proven methods to reduce gun violence?
That's an interesting question, to do a PR campaign around what works for gun violence.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I mean, it's in the end, it comes down to the mayor's administration and the mayor doing it. It is a good idea to do a PR campaign. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but like blitzing the mayor's office into doing something. I mean, they should do it, you know, they should just do what works, but it's a good idea. It's an interesting idea.
What is the role of the business community in addressing gun violence? How can the economic impact and social impact be seen as interdependent?
Yeah, I think that one of the business community is part of the fabric of Philadelphia. And I think it's important. The city has certain responsibilities to business, and then business has certain responsibilities as well. And I think that the city needs to have a certain degree of public safety to make businesses have their employees feel safe. So on that regard, I think the city really needs to do a better job making the city safe, so that businesses welcome their employees back into Center City. And I think that's very important. In terms of businesses helping with the gun violence issue, there are other cities that have a more active business and philanthropic community around these issues. Chicago, the sports teams, business, and the foundations teamed up to raise tens of millions of dollars to combat gun violence. I think that's something that is possible here in the future, that with the right convener, the right leader, that we could rally all the different players in our city to say, look, we need to do this. So there's more to come on that.
Okay. Is there a connection between literacy rates and violence?
Well, there are definitely connections between what's called disadvantage, according to the US Census, and disadvantage is poverty, but it's also a lot of health outcomes, educational attainment. So there's not directly, to my knowledge, just literacy to gun violence a correlation, but it's educational attainment and other indicators that correlate with gun violence. So it is about improving our schools and making each child reach their potential. We have our school system, our education system right now only has 40% of fourth graders reading at grade level. And that's unacceptable. There's all these kids out there that aren't getting what they need from the education system early on. So I think there's absolutely so much work to do on that front.
Okay. Any initiatives in Philly to work with gun shops and ranges on promoting gun safety and mental health?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if there are partnerships right now between the city and gun shops. The majority of, and that's an interesting question. I'll take that back to my team. I do know that the majority of homicide and shootings in cities is done with illegal guns. So, they are not guns purchased legally. They are guns purchased illegally. And so that it really, we need to work on getting people not to shoot, and also to crack down on those illegal guns, to get at the issue.
All right. And as a way of expanding the pool of police applicants, should Philly allow suburban applicants?
That's an interesting question. That for city employment overall, the rule historically had, for a long time, had been that you have to live in the city within 6 months of getting hired. Then there was a city council bill that was passed a year or two ago that said that in order to become a police officer, you needed to live in the city for 1 year before becoming an officer, which basically limited the recruitment pool to people that live in the city. And the Philadelphia Police Department has historically recruited from Westchester, Villanova, schools outside of the city with majors in criminal justice. That council bill was frozen or paused so that the Philadelphia Police Department can now recruit from outside the city. But officers do need to live in the city within 6 months.
One final question. Are there initiatives to get music stations not to broadcast violence advocating lyrics?
So this is a tough one about violence in music. There's something called drill music, which is very violent. I think that music, and this is just my personal opinion, music is an expression of people's lived experience. And often there's violence in music because there's violence in those individuals' lives, and we have to fix the environment. So I do think, though, there are some examples of what's called drill music where there's actually threats to kill someone within the song. Obviously that's not okay, if it's endangering another person's life. But I think we need to get at the root cause of the environment in which so many of our kids, teenagers are growing up in, that is creating expression that is so dark and violent.
It's just about 2:00, and I want to thank you, Rebecca, for both the presentation and for the extensive response to questions.
Sure.
We've had over 30 people staying the entire hour to listen to this and learn from it. I think it demonstrates the high concern in the community about an issue that we all know about, and it is of concern to all of us. And so I really do think focusing on it and speaking about it in the way you have is of enormous importance to us. I want to remind people that the link to register for our annual meeting next Thursday is still posted in the chat. We can pick this conversation up with Representative Brown and talk about efforts in Harrisburg to help us with these issues. And as usual, CCRA appreciates your participation. I know we care about this. You guys are great members, and we thank you all. And thank you, Rebecca, for sharing your time with us.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone for being on. And we'll get it under control eventually. We just have to do the right things. So thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks.